The grandfather clock in the hall, a stoic, mahogany sentinel that had marked the passage of the Vance family's time for generations, began to chime. It was midnight. Liam sat in the worn leather armchair in the library, a book resting unread in his lap. The air in the room, usually thick with the comforting scent of old paper and wood smoke, was thin and sharp tonight, charged with an unspoken tension that had been building for months. Each chime of the clock felt less like a note and more like a hammer blow against a pane of glass that was already fractured. Clara stood by the window, a silhouette against the moon-drenched gardens. She had not spoken for 10 minutes, but her silence was louder than any argument they had ever had. When the clock's final, resonant chime faded into the vast stillness of the house, she turned. Her face, usually a mask of carefully curated beauty, was hard, resolute. It was the face of a woman who had made a decision and was now merely performing the formality of announcing it. "I'm leaving you, Liam," she said. The words were not shouted, not wept. They were delivered with the cool, dispassionate finality of a verdict. They landed in the quiet room and shattered the fragile peace he had been trying to hold together. She thought this was the climactic moment, the shocking situation that would break him. She assumed he was a simple man, a quiet architect whose greatest ambition was to restore old houses. She didn't know that the very foundation she stood upon, this house, her family's legacy, her entire life, was a structure he had secretly designed and built. Within the next hour, everything she believed to be true would be systematically demolished, and she would find herself begging to be allowed back in the ruins. This is a story about the difference between what things seem to be and what they are, about the quiet strength that is often mistaken for weakness. If you've ever felt underestimated or wished for a moment of quiet vindication, then I think you'll understand what happens next. Do me a favor and hit that like button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to that library, just after midnight, as the world began to shift on its axis. Liam didn't move. He didn't gasp, or rage, or even look surprised. He simply watched her, his gaze steady. This stillness, this infuriating placidity, was the first thing to put a crack in her resolve. She had rehearsed this scene in her mind 100 times, always with him pleading, crying, falling apart. His calm was an unexpected variable. It annoyed her. "Did you hear me?" she asked, her voice sharpened with an edge of impatience. "I said it's over. I'm leaving." "I heard you, Clara," he replied. His voice was low even. He closed the book in his lap, the soft thud of the cover echoing the finality of her own words. He placed it carefully on the small table beside his chair. Every movement was deliberate, measured, as if he had all the time in the world. "Well," she demanded, walking towards him, her heels clicking in aggressive rhythm on the polished hardwood floor. "Aren't you going to say anything? Aren't you going to try and stop me?" "Should I?" he asked, a genuine question that seemed to unmoor her completely. She stopped in the center of the room, under the cold light of the crystal chandelier. "Of course you should. We've been married for 12 years. This house, our life." Her gesture encompassed the room, the towering shelves of books she'd never read, the priceless antiques she'd inherited, the entire opulent stage set of their marriage. "Tell me about him," Liam said, his voice still quiet, yet it cut through her rising agitation like a scalpel. Clara faltered. "What?" "Him," Liam repeated, his eyes holding hers. "The man you're leaving me for. You wouldn't be doing this unless there was someone else. You're not brave enough to be alone. So, tell me about him. He must be something special to make you throw away 12 years. The accusation, delivered so calmly, was also a permission slip. She seized it. The frustration she felt at his lack of a dramatic reaction now had an outlet. She could finally begin the monologue she had prepared, the list of grievances that would justify her decision, not just to him, but to herself. "His name is Marco," she began, the name itself seeming to give her strength. "And yes, Liam, he is special. He's alive. He's dynamic. He doesn't just sit in a dusty room with old books and blueprints of buildings that will never get built. He does things. He takes risks. He lives. She paced as she spoke, her movements becoming more fluid, more theatrical. She was performing now, casting herself as the heroine escaping a drab, colorless prison. "Do you have any idea how boring you've become?" she continued, her voice dripping with a contempt that had been fermenting for years. "I married a man I thought had ambition, a man who was going to make a name for himself. But you settled. You're a mid-level architect at a firm where you're completely overlooked. You draw your little sketches, you get your pathetic salary, and you come home to this mausoleum and pretend you're the lord of the manor." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "My parents were right about you from the very beginning. They saw it. They saw that you had no fire, no drive. You were just safe. A safe, boring choice. And I was a fool to think I could light a fire in you." Liam's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second. The mention of her parents, Robert and Eleanor Vance, was a deliberate twist of the knife. He remembered the dinners, the holidays, the endless, subtle humiliations. Robert's condescending questions about his little projects, Eleanor's pitying glances and backhanded compliments about how admirably he was coping with the pressures of marrying into their family. "Marco isn't like that," Clara went on, her voice softening as she spoke of her new man, a stark contrast to the venom she reserved for her husband. "He runs an import-export business. He travels. He knows people, important people. When he walks into a room, people notice him. He doesn't fade into the wallpaper like you do, Liam. He's taking me to Monaco next week. After that, who knows? The world. He wants to show me the world I've been missing, trapped here with you." She painted a vivid picture of this other life, a life of sun-drenched yachts, glittering parties, and passionate, whirlwind romance. It was a life curated from the pages of the glossy magazines she devoured. In her mind, Marco was the key to unlocking this fantasy, and Liam was the lock on the cage. As she spoke, Liam's mind wasn't on Monaco or the mythical Marco. It was on the numbers. It was on the intricate web of finance and obligation that underpinned the very floor she was pacing on. He thought of the late nights, not sketching unrealized buildings, but structuring multi-million-dollar deals. He thought of the phone calls not to contractors, but to wealth managers in Zurich and Hong Kong. He thought of the life he lived between the lines of the one Clara saw, the real life that funded her fantasy. Her contempt for his job was particularly ironic. A mid-level architect, that was his official title, the one on his tax returns, the one he gave at dinner parties. It was a perfect piece of camouflage. It allowed him to move through her world, her parents' world, without attracting notice, without arousing suspicion. It allowed him to work unobserved, to build. "In this house," she said, finally arriving at her grand finale. She swept her arm out again, a gesture of dismissal. "I know you love it. You've poured so much of yourself into restoring it, polishing my family's legacy while you let your own life gather dust. Well, you don't have to worry about it anymore. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Obviously, you'll have to leave. The house is a Vance property. It's been in my family for 100 years. It's mine." This was the pinnacle of her argument, the final, unassailable point. The house was her birthright, the symbol of her superior lineage, the one thing that truly separated her from him. In her mind, he was just a tenant, a caretaker who had overstayed his welcome. He watched her, the triumphant look on her face, the absolute certainty in her eyes. And for the first time that night, a feeling stirred within him, something other than patience and sadness. It was a cool, sharp clarity. The time for silence was over. The time for listening had passed. He had spent 12 years protecting her, not just from the world, but from the truth. He had shielded her from the harsh realities of her family's fall from grace. He had built a beautiful, gilded cage around her and let her believe it was a palace of her own making. He had done it, he realized, not just out of love, but out of a misguided sense of duty and perhaps a little bit of pride in his own ability to manage it all so seamlessly. Tonight, she wasn't just leaving him. She was trying to burn down the structure he had so carefully built. She was spitting on the legacy he had quietly preserved. He looked at her, standing there in her expensive silk dress, radiating a confidence she had not earned, in a house she did not own, planning a future that was about to evaporate. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he was about to tell her the truth. Not out of anger or revenge, but because it was the only thing left to do. The foundation had been condemned. It was time to bring the whole building down. The humiliation, he knew, was a necessary part of her speech. It was designed to provoke a reaction, to create a scene that would validate her choice. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor, had been masters of this particular art. Liam had sat through countless family dinners where his career, his family background, his very presence at their table was treated as a curiosity, a slightly embarrassing project their daughter had taken on. "Remember that dinner for my father's 60th? Clara continued, her voice taking on a cruel, reminiscent tone. All his partners from the old firm were there, men who built this city. And Dad goes around the table, asking everyone what they're working on. They're talking about skyscrapers, new financial districts, and then he gets to you." She paused for effect. "And you started talking about restoring the cornice work on the old city library." The cornice work. She said the words as if they were something foul in her mouth. "I've never been so embarrassed in my entire life." The table went silent. Eleanor, my mother, just smiled that tight little smile of hers. The one that means she's screaming on the inside. "You made us a laughingstock." Liam remembered that dinner vividly. He remembered the dismissive look in Robert Vance's eyes. He also remembered what he hadn't said at that table. He hadn't mentioned that his little project at the library was a pro bono historical preservation effort he was personally funding. He hadn't mentioned that it was a test run for the proprietary carbon fiber reinforcement techniques he had developed, techniques that were the core of the proposal that would, 6 months later, land his silent partnership the contract to retrofit and earthquake-proof every major high-rise Robert Vance's old partners had ever built. A contract worth 9 figures. He had wanted to tell her that night, to share the victory with his wife. But seeing the shame on her face, he had held his tongue. He had let her believe he was small, because the thought of explaining how big he was becoming seemed too exhausting. "It's not just them," Clara pressed on, sensing she had hit a nerve. "It's you. Your contentment is suffocating. You're happy with a good book and a glass of cheap whiskey. Marco wants to drink champagne from the bottle on a private jet. Can you even see the difference, Liam? Can you comprehend the sheer difference in scale and ambition?" Liam's eyes drifted to his desk at the far end of the library. It was a massive, mahogany partner's desk, another Vance heirloom. But on its meticulously organized surface, among the neat stacks of papers and architectural tools, sat a single object that was entirely his own. It was a fountain pen. It was not ostentatious. It was matte black, sleek, with a simple, unadorned silver clip. It looked modern, minimalist, almost severe against the rococo clutter of the room. To Clara, it was just another one of his boring, functional possessions. To Liam, it was a symbol. The pen had been a gift from Mr. Harrison, the enigmatic billionaire founder of the international development firm, where Liam supposedly worked as a mid-level drone. Harrison had given it to him 5 years ago, after Liam had saved a multi-billion-dollar project in Dubai from catastrophic failure, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, elegant design modification he'd sketched on a napkin during a panic conference call. "The greatest power," Liam, Harrison had told him, his voice a low rumble, "is the power that is never seen. Let them have their titles and their corner offices. You and I will own the building." The pen was a Lamy 2000, a classic of Bauhaus design. Form following function. No wastidokerastion. It was everything the Vance family and this house was not. It was a reminder of his true north, of the world of quiet competence and immense, hidden power he actually inhabited. His hand twitched, an almost imperceptible desire to reach for it, to feel its cool, balanced weight in his palm. Not yet. He had to let her finish. He had to let her build her case, brick by brick, so the demolition would be all the more absolute. "And so, I'm going," she said, her tirade winding down, her energy spent. She walked back to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm going to pack a bag. Marco is picking me up in an hour. I'd appreciate it if you would just make yourself scarce. Go to your study. Go for a walk. I don't want to see you. I don't want this to be any more awkward than it already is." The sheer audacity of it was almost breathtaking. To be summarily dismissed in his own home. A home he had saved. A home he owned. A home he had spent a decade turning into a sanctuary for the very woman who was now trying to evict him from it. "My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, will send the papers to your office on Monday," she added, a final, practical nail in the coffin. "It should be straightforward. We have no children, and all the major assets, like the house, are in my family's name. It's a clean break. A clean break." The phrase hung in the air. Liam thought about the labyrinthine network of trusts and holding companies he had constructed to manage the Vance family's hidden debts, to funnel money into Robert's failing consultancy, to pay for Eleanor's charity galas and Clara's shopping sprees. A clean break was impossible. Their lives were not two separate lines that had run in parallel. His was the very bedrock on which hers was built. Severing the connection wouldn't be clean, it would be a cataclysm. He watched her reflection in the dark glass of the window. She looked, for a moment, like a stranger. Beautiful, elegant, and utterly oblivious. She was so confident in the strength of her position, a position built on a century of Vance family lore, on stories of wealth and power that had been hollowed out long before she was born. She was placing all her faith in a history that was a ghost, a myth he himself had been paying to keep alive. The silence stretched. He let it sit, let it become heavy, uncomfortable for her. He could see her shoulders tense. His lack of response was unnerving her more than any shouting match could have. She expected a fight, and he was giving her a vacuum. Finally, when he was sure she had said everything she needed to say, when her entire case against him had been laid bare, he slowly, deliberately pushed himself up from the armchair. He didn't look at her. Instead, he walked across the room to his desk. The room was long, and the walk seemed to take an eternity. Each soft footfall on the antique Persian rug was a drumbeat, counting down the last few seconds of the world she knew. He reached the desk, and his hand closed around the cool, smooth barrel of the black fountain pen. He picked it up. The weight of it in his hand was familiar, grounding. It was a tool, an instrument of creation and, tonight, of deconstruction. He turned, the pen held loosely between his fingers, and faced her. His expression was no longer just calm. It was something else. It was the face of a man who was about to begin his work. Clara's confidence, so absolute just moments before, began to fray at the edges. She had expected him to be gone by now, to have retreated in shame. Instead, he stood before her, holding that ridiculous pen, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity she had never seen before. It was the look of a chess master who had just seen the entire game, 20 moves ahead, and was now preparing to make the first, simple, inevitable move that would lead to checkmate. "A clean break," he said, his voice soft, yet it filled the room. "That's what you want." It wasn't a question. He uncapped the pen. The small click was unnaturally loud in the silence. He didn't have any paper in front of him. He was simply holding it, ready. "You've made your plans," Liam continued, his voice calm, almost conversational. Monaco, the world. It all sounds very exciting." He took a step away from the desk, moving toward the center of the room. He was no longer on the defensive, no longer the passive audience to her drama. He was taking the stage. "You've outlined your future, and you've outlined my failures. It all seems very clear in your mind." "It is clear," Clara said, though her voice wavered slightly. She didn't like the turn this was taking. His composure was a fortress she couldn't find a way to breach. "Is it?" Liam asked. He stopped a few feet from her. "You see, Clara, the problem with your plan, with your entire vision of the future, is that it's based on a series of misapprehensions. You've built a beautiful narrative, a story of escape and liberation. But the story is fiction, and it's time for a dose of theatrical naturalism." She stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this house," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You said it's a Vance property, that it's been in your family for 100 years. You're right about the second part. You're wrong about the first. Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed, regaining a sliver of her bravado. "This house is the cornerstone of the Vance estate. It's in the family trust. My father explained it all to me years ago. Did he? Liam smiled, a thin, sad smile that did not reach his eyes. Did he also explain to you what happened in the fall of 2012? After the secondary mortgage crisis hit his commercial real estate ventures? Did he tell you about the leveraged buyout of that tech company that went bankrupt 6 weeks later? Did he tell you about the margin calls? The color began to drain from Clara's face. These were words she'd heard in hushed, angry phone calls from her father years ago, fragments of a disaster she had been encouraged to ignore. Your father, Robert, is a charming man, Liam went on, his tone devoid of malice, stating facts as an engineer would list specifications. He's a wonderful storyteller, but he is a catastrophic businessman. By Christmas of 2012, Vance Industries was insolvent. He had leveraged everything, including this house, to cover his losses. He wasn't just broke, Clara. He was facing bankruptcy, public disgrace, and potential criminal charges for investor fraud. No, she whispered. That's not true. My father, he's a respected consultant now. A consultancy that has one client, Liam said gently. One that pays a generous monthly retainer into his account. A retainer that allows him and your mother to maintain their club memberships, to host their charity events, to live the life they believe is their birthright. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That client is a holding company. That holding company is owned by me. Clara swayed, as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. She reached out, placing a hand on the back of a velvet armchair to steady herself. You're lying. Am I? Liam walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single, thick document bound in dark blue leather. He didn't open it. He just placed it on the polished surface of the desk. The title, embossed in gold leaf, was simple. Blackwood Manor Holdings, LLC. The deed to this house, the land it sits on, and the holding company that owns your father's debt are all in this file. I bought it all in February of 2013 through a blind auction conducted by the bank that was about to foreclose. I paid cash. He looked at her, his expression one of profound weariness. For 10 years, Clara, I have maintained this fiction for you, for your parents. I let Robert believe he was a consultant. I let Eleanor believe she was still a society queen. And I let you believe you were the heiress to a grand legacy. All of it. Every dinner party, every vacation, every piece of jewelry, every allowance from your father. It was all me. It was my money, filtered through a half-dozen layers of legal and financial architecture to protect your pride. To protect the illusion. She stared at the blue folder on the desk, as if it were a bomb. The house wasn't hers. It was his. The very symbol of her superiority, the foundation of her condescension, was a gift from a man she despised for his lack of ambition. He hadn't been polishing her family's legacy. He had bought the broken pieces of it and secretly glued them back together. Why? She finally managed to choke out. The question was barely a whisper. Why would you do all that? Because I loved you, he said simply. The words were heavy with the past tense. And I thought that was what love meant. Protecting you. Giving you the life you thought you deserved. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I was successful enough, that eventually you would see me. Not the boring, mid-level architect. The real me. He let out a long, slow breath. I was wrong. My success was invisible to you because you never bothered to look. You didn't want a partner, Clara. You wanted an accessory, and I wasn't the right brand. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of tension, but of a vacuum. The air had been sucked out of the room, along with all of Clara's certainty, all of her justifications. She was adrift in a reality she didn't recognize. Then her phone buzzed on the mantelpiece where she'd left it. A sharp, insistent sound in the quiet devastation. That's probably Marco, Liam said, his voice still unervingly calm. He's punctual, I'll give him that. You should answer it. I believe your hour is up. The mention of Marco seemed to bring her back from the brink. He was her lifeline, her escape from this nightmare. She fumbled for the phone, her hands shaking. She looked at the screen. It was him, with a defiant look at Liam, a desperate attempt to reclaim some power. She answered, putting the phone to her ear. Marco, she said, her voice trembling. Liam watched her. He knew what was coming next. Because the truth about the house was only the first revelation of the night. It was the foundation. Now, it was time to bring down the rest of the structure. "Before you commit to your new life," Liam said, as she held the phone to her ear, "there's one more thing you should know about Marco's dynamic import-export business." Clara's face, already pale, became a mask of ghostly white. She was listening to two conversations at once: the panicked, confused voice of her lover in her ear, and the quiet, devastating pronouncements of her husband in the room. "His business is real," Liam conceded, a small, almost generous acknowledgement. "But it's new, and like most new businesses, it's heavily leveraged. It runs on a single, substantial line of credit. Without that credit, his inventory is frozen, his shipping contracts are voided, and his entire operation grinds to a halt in about 30 minutes. On the phone, Marco's voice was rising in pitch, a frantic edge creeping in. Clara's eyes were wide with horror, darting from the phone to Liam and back again. She was trying to process what she was hearing from Marco. Words like credit recalled, account frozen, no warning, and reconcile them with the calm, clinical explanation coming from Liam. "That line of credit," Liam continued, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "is underwritten by a rather aggressive investment group that specializes in high-risk, high-reward ventures. It's called Argent Capital Partners." He paused. "You've probably never heard of it. It's one of my more private ventures. I founded it 3 years ago." He walked over to the fireplace and leaned an arm against the marble mantel, standing not far from her. He was so close she could feel the warmth from the dying embers, a stark contrast to the ice flooding her veins. "About 15 minutes ago," he said, glancing at the grandfather clock as if checking a train schedule, "my office in Zurich sent an automated, time-stamped email to the bank that holds Marco's credit line. The email contained a single directive: recall immediately due to a material change in associated risk profile. The associated risk profile, of course, was you." Clara's hand, holding the phone, dropped to her side. Marco's tinny, panicked voice was still chattering away, but she could no longer make out the words. She was staring at Liam, at the man she had called boring, ambitionless, safe. You ruined him," she whispered, the accusation lacking any fire. It was a statement of dawning, terrifying fact. "No," Liam corrected her gently. "I simply chose to stop funding my wife's affair. There's a difference. Marco was never the dynamic tycoon you imagine, Clara. He was a gambler who was playing with my money. He saw you, with your Vance name in this house, and he saw a golden ticket. He saw an easy path to legitimacy. He made the same mistake you did. He underestimated me. He judged the book by its very plain, very durable cover. He reached out and, with a startlingly gentle finger, ended the call on her phone. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute. "You see," Liam said, his voice now filled with a profound, aching sadness, "the real irony is that I knew about Marco for months. I knew from the first ridiculously expensive bouquet of flowers he sent you. I own a majority stake in the floral delivery service. I knew about the hotel rooms. I'm a silent partner in the hotel chain. I knew about the secret lunches and the whispered phone calls. My entire life, the one you found so dull, is about building and owning the infrastructure that people like you and Marco simply live inside, without ever thinking to look at the plumbing." He shook his head, a gesture of self-recrimination. "I kept hoping you'd get bored of him, that you'd see him for the shallow charlatan he is and come back to your senses. I kept the illusion going, hoping it would be enough to hold on to you. But tonight, you didn't just want to leave. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to salt the earth. You stood in my house, a house I saved to protect your family's honor, and you told me I was unfit to live in it. You mocked my work, the very work that paid for your clothes, your car, your lover's entire enterprise." He finally picked up the dark blue folder from his desk and held out to her. "This is the reality, Clara, not the stories your father tells, or the fantasies you've built with Marco. This, the numbers, the deeds, the debt obligations. This is the world as it is, not as you wish it to be." She didn't take it. Her arms were limp at her sides. Her mind, which had been soaring on indignant fury just an hour ago, was now struggling to grasp the sheer scale of its own ignorance. Everything she had believed to be a solid truth, her family status, her own inheritance, her lover's success, her husband's failure, had been revealed as a lie. And not just a lie, but a carefully constructed stage set, built and paid for by the one person she held in the lowest esteem. The weight of this new reality was too much. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the plush rug, not with a dramatic faint, but with the slow, graceless collapse of a puppet whose strings have been cut. The silk of her dress pooled around her. She looked up at Liam, her face a ruin of makeup and shattered pride. The arrogance was gone. The contempt was gone. All that was left was raw, primal panic. The panic of someone who has just realized they are not the player, but a pawn in a game they never even knew was being played. "Please," she breathed, the first word of her new vocabulary. "Liam, please." The transformation was shocking. The imperious queen who had delivered a verdict of exile was now a supplicant, kneeling on the floor of a kingdom she had just learned was not hers. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the first tremors of a breakdown. "Please what, Clara?" Liam asked, his voice devoid of triumph. He felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache. This was not a victory. It was a tragedy. He had wanted her to see him, not to break her. Don't do this," she stammered, her hands clutching at the fabric of her dress. "The money. Marco, my parents, everything." She couldn't form a coherent sentence. Her mind was a slideshow of horrors. The eviction notice she had planned for him now plastered on her own future. Her parents, stripped of their pride and their income. Her glamorous escape to Monaco turning into a one-way ticket to obscurity. "I didn't do this, Clara," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You did. You made a choice based on a world you invented. I just showed you the real 1 inch. But you can fix it," she cried, a desperate hope flickering in her eyes. "You can undo it. The email, the credit line, you can call them back. You can save him. You can save us." The us hung in the air between them, a phantom limb of their marriage. She was trying to re-establish a connection, to find a lever she could pull. Liam knelt, not to her level, but down on one knee, so he could look her in the eye. It was an act of intimacy that felt more profound than any they had shared in years. "There is no us to save, Clara. You made that perfectly clear an hour ago. And there is no him to save. Marco was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the lie we were living, the one I helped build and you happily inhabited." He saw the calculation in her eyes, the desperate search for a new strategy. If contrition wouldn't work, perhaps seduction would. She reached out, her hand shaking, to touch his arm. "Liam, I was a fool. I was so wrong. You're right. You're brilliant. I see that now. I see you. I always knew, deep down, how capable you were. I was just scared, intimidated." The words were honeyed, but the intent was poison. It was a new performance, the penitent wife. Liam gently removed her hand from his arm. "No, Clara. Don't do that," he said softly. "Don't cheapen what little is left between us with more lies. You didn't see me. You didn't know. You saw a convenient, stable man who could provide a comfortable backdrop for your life, and you grew bored of the scenery. That is the truth. Let's at least hold on to that." Her face crumpled. The last of her mask had been stripped away, and the raw terror beneath was ugly to behold. "So what happens now?" she whispered. "What do you want me to do? Beg? Is that it? You want me to beg you to stay?" "I don't want anything from you," he said, and the simple, honest finality of the statement seemed to wound her more than any anger could have. He stood up, turning his back on her for a moment to look at the portrait of her great-grandfather that hung over the fireplace. A stern, jowled man who had actually built a fortune before his descendants had squandered it. "Your parents should be a part of this conversation," Liam said, walking back to his desk and picking up his own phone. "They've been living in this illusion longer than you have." "No, please don't," she begged, scrambling to her feet. "My father, his heart. My mother, the shame. The shame." Liam turned to face her, and for the first time, a flicker of cold anger showed in his eyes. The shame of living an honest life? The shame of not being Ablito, a for the country club? Is that worse than the shame of living a life funded by the son-in-law you've systematically mocked and belittled for 12 years? They enabled this, Clara. Their obsession with status, with appearances, is the poison that has infected our entire marriage. They need to hear the truth. From me. He found Robert Vance's number and pressed the call button, switching it to speakerphone. The phone rang, a shrill, piercing sound in the library. Once, twice, 3 times. Liam. Robert Vance's voice was thick with sleep and annoyance. It's after 1 in the morning. Is everything all right? Is Clara okay? Clara is right here, Robert, Liam said, his voice cool and clear. And no, nothing is all right. We're in the library. I thought it was time for some late-night reading. I'm looking at the Blackwood Manor Holdings file. I think you know the one I mean. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Liam could practically hear the gears turning in Robert's mind, the sleepy fog instantly burned away by pure, cold dread. I don't know what you're talking about, Robert stammered. Oh, I think you do, Liam said. I'm also looking at the quarterly statements for your consultancy, and Clara has just finished telling me that she's leaving me for a man whose business I've just had the pleasure of dismantling. So, all things considered, I think we have some things to discuss. As a family, he heard a woman's voice in the background. Eleanor, waking up. Robert? What is it? Who is that? Clara stood frozen, a spectator at her own immolation. Her plea for her parents' sake had been turned into a summons for their judgment. She was no longer the protagonist of this drama. She was just part of the wreckage. The phone on Liam's desk buzzed. It was a text message. He glanced down at it. It was from a number he knew well. Mr. Harrison. The message was simple. Dubai is greenlit. Your design. Your terms. The sheik is ecstatic. Well done, son. Will you back in the office? Liam smiled, a genuine, tired smile. The real world, his world, was still turning. This drama in the library was just a small, painful piece of it. He typed a quick reply. Dealing with a small demolition project at home. We'll advise tomorrow. He looked back at Clara, who was staring at the speakerphone as if it were a serpent. Her life was on that line. Her parents' life was on that line. And the man holding the phone, the man she had dismissed and despised, was the only one who could decide whether to let the serpent strike. The begging had started with her. But he knew, before the night was over, she would not be the only one on her knees. The voice of Robert Vance, when it finally returned to the speakerphone, was a shadow of its former self. The blustering, condescending tone was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tremor. Liam, whatever is going on, I'm sure we can sort it out. There's no need for rash decisions. Rash, Liam echoed, a note of incredulous irony in his voice. Robert, I have been making carefully considered strategic decisions to keep your family afloat for 10 years. The time for rash was a decade ago, when you bet your entire family fortune on a failing tech company. What we're doing now is simply balancing the books. In the background, Eleanor's voice rose, sharp and panicked. What is he talking about, Robert? What books? Give me the phone. There was a fumbling sound, and then his mother-in-law's voice, crisp and commanding, came on the line. Liam, this is Eleanor. Stop this nonsense at once. Whatever marital squabble you and Clara are having, it is no excuse to call us at this hour and threaten my husband. Good evening, Eleanor, Liam said, his politeness a weapon. I'm not threatening Robert. I'm informing him. And you. Clara has decided to leave me. She feels I'm not ambitious enough. That my station in life is a source of embarrassment to the Vance family name. Well, Eleanor started and then stopped, clearly unsure how to proceed without her usual arsenal of subtle insults. The problem, Liam continued, saving her the trouble, is that the Vance family name for the past decade has been little more than a brand that I have been funding. Your house, your car, your position as head of the hospital benefit committee, all of it has been subsidized by the man you've so often pitted for marrying into a family he could never truly be a part of. A choked sound came from the other end of the line. It was a sound Liam had never heard from his mother-in-law, the sound of genuine shock. Clara has just learned this, Liam said, his eyes on his wife, who was now hugging herself, rocking back and forth slightly. She's also learned that her new partner, Marco, has had his funding pulled. It seems his prospects are not as bright as she was led to believe. So we find ourselves at an impasse. Clara wants to leave, but it appears she has nowhere to go. And you and Robert are, as of this moment, living on the charity of a man your daughter has just discarded. He let the silence stretch, a canvas on which they could all paint their own futures. He could hear Robert's labored breathing. He could hear Eleanor's sharp, shallow breaths. He could see Clara's world collapsing in on itself. "What do you want, Liam?" Robert finally asked, his voice defeated. The question was stripped of all pretense. It was the raw plea of a man who knows he has lost. This was the question Liam had been waiting for. Not from Clara, whose motives were now purely self-preservation, but from the patriarch, the man whose pride had been the source of so much of this poison. "Want?" Liam said, walking over to the window and looking out at the manicured lawns, illuminated by the cold, impartial light of the moon. "That's a good question. 12 years ago, I wanted your daughter's love and your respect. I achieved one and was denied the other. For the last 10 years, I've wanted to build a life, a real one, and I've been so busy propping up a fake one that I almost forgot how. Tonight, I wanted to be left alone with a good book. But Clara had other plans." He turned back to the room. "What I want now, Robert, is the truth. I want an end to the lies, an end to the whispers and the pitying looks at family dinners, an end to the performance." He looked at Clara. "You can't stay here," he said, and her face fell, thinking this was the final blow. "Not as my wife. That woman ceased to exist an hour ago. The marriage, as you so clearly stated, is over." A sob escaped Clara's lips. On the phone, Eleanor gasped, "Liam, no. You can't just throw her out." "Throw her out?" Liam asked, a bitter laugh escaping him. "That was her plan for me, was it not? To be made scarce? To be evicted from my home? No, Eleanor. I am not you. I am not Robert. I do not discard people when they become inconvenient." He walked over to Clara and looked down at her, his expression softening from anger to a deep, weary pity. "Here is my offer, and it is the only one I will make. The divorce will proceed as you wished. Mr. Abernathy can send the papers. I will not contest it." Clara looked up, her eyes wide with terror. This was not the reprieve she was hoping for. "You have two choices," he continued, his voice taking on the tone of a project manager laying out options. "Option A, you leave. Tonight. With one bag, as you intended. I will give you a severance. A sum of money, say $50,000, enough to get a small apartment and start over. You will be on your own. No Marco. No family money, because there is none. Just you, and a chance to build a life that is actually yours." He paused. "Or, option B, you stay. Not in our room. Not as my wife. You will move into the guest cottage at the edge of the property. It's small but comfortable. You will be given a budget, a small one for groceries and necessities. And you'll get a job. A real job. Not a vanity position on a charity board. You will earn your own money. You will pay rent for the cottage, a nominal sum. And you will learn what it feels like to build something from nothing. You will learn the value of your own work." He looked from Clara to the speakerphone. "The same choice, in a way, applies to you, Robert and Eleanor. You can continue in your roles as my dependents, with the full knowledge of what that means. The consultancy will continue, but it will be on my terms, with quarterly performance reviews. Or, I can liquidate your debt, sell this house, and give you what's left. You could retire comfortably, somewhere modest. Florida, perhaps, but the performance would be over. The Vance name would go back to being just a name. It was a masterstroke of justice. It was not revenge. It was responsibility. He was not punishing them. He was giving them the one thing they had never had, a real choice. A choice between a comfortable, hollow lie and a difficult, honest truth. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Leave with nothing, or stay as a tenant on the estate she once thought she owned. It was an impossible choice, a devastating fall from grace. But in the wreckage of her life, she saw a glimmer of something she hadn't expected, a lifeline. He wasn't casting her out into the darkness. He was offering her a path back to the light, albeit a hard, unfamiliar one. I'll stay, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Option B. On the phone, there was a long silence, then Robert's voice, frail and broken. We need to talk. We'll talk in the morning. Yes, Liam said. We will. He ended the call, plunging the library back into a thick, profound silence. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 2. An hour had passed. An entire world had been unmade and remade in that single, terrible hour. Clara was still on the floor, but she was no longer crying. She was just staring at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, as if seeing it for the first time. It was a beautiful, complex design, woven with a skill and patience she was only just beginning to comprehend. Liam walked to the bar cart in the corner of the room, the one he rarely used. He poured 2 fingers of the expensive single malt whiskey Robert had given him for Christmas, a bottle Liam himself had paid for through the consultancy retainer. He swirled the amber liquid, the ice clinking softly in the crystal glass. He had won. By every conceivable metric, he had won. He had defended his home, asserted his power, and brought his arrogant, unfaithful wife and her condescending family to their knees. The sense of vindication should have been overwhelming, a triumphant crescendo. But as he stood there, in the quiet of his library, surrounded by the evidence of his secret empire, he felt no triumph. He felt only the immense, crushing weight of his victory. He had demolished the house of lies, but what was left in its place? A broken woman on the floor, a ruined business associate, a terrified pair of in-laws, and him, alone in the center of the devastation he had wrought. He had maintained his moral high ground. He hadn't been cruel, only honest. He hadn't been vindictive, only decisive. He had offered a path to redemption, not just a sentence of punishment. Yet, the victory felt as hollow as the life he had just dismantled. He thought of Mr. Harrison's words. The greatest power is the power that is never seen. He had been forced to show his hand, to reveal the hidden machinery of his life. And in doing so, he had broken the spell. The magic was gone. Now, there was only the cold, hard reality of the morning after. Clara slowly, stiffly got to her feet. She did not look at him. She looked around the library, at the books, the furniture, the paintings, as if she were a tourist in a museum. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, were finally seeing the room for what it was. Not a collection of inherited treasures, but the carefully curated assets of one man's quiet, relentless work. The guest cottage, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Where are the keys? Liam reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small, simple brass key on a plain leather fob. He had had it made months ago, after he'd had the cottage quietly renovated, updated. For what? He wasn't sure at the time. A contingency plan, a quiet retreat for himself. He had never imagined he would be giving it to her. He held it out. She walked toward him and took it from his hand, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting second. Her skin was cold. "Thank you," she said. The words were small, but they were the first true words she had spoken to him all night. It was not a thank you for his mercy. It was the thank you of a drowning person to the one who has thrown them a rope, even if that rope leads not to the shore, but to another, smaller, rock. She turned and walked out of the library, her steps uncertain on the hardwood floor. He listened to her footsteps recede down the long hall, the sound swallowed by the vast, silent house. He was alone. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale, gray light through the tall library windows. The dawn was breaking on a new day, a new reality. Liam walked to the window and watched the sky turn from indigo to a soft, hopeful pink. He had unmade his marriage, but he had reclaimed his life. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself again, the man who had been hidden for so long behind a facade of quiet mediocrity. The coming days would be hard. There would be lawyers and accountants. There would be difficult conversations and painful adjustments. Clara's journey from heiress to tenant would be a fraught, uncertain one. Her parents' descent from their imaginary pedestal would be a bitter pill. But for the first time in a long time, there were no more secrets. The foundation was clear. From here, He could build anything. He thought about the choices he had made, the path of quiet integrity, of patient strength. He had absorbed the insults, the condescension, the humiliation, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to know they didn't matter. His worth was not determined by their opinion of him. It was forged in the late nights, in the complex designs, in the silent, successful execution of his plans. The story of the arrogant wife and the underestimated husband was over. A new story was beginning. A story of a man free to build his own legacy in the open under the sun. And perhaps a story of a woman given a second chance, not to reclaim her status, but to build something far more valuable, a character. He took a sip of the whiskey. It was smooth, complex, with a long, lingering finish. It tasted like justice. Not the hot, fiery justice of revenge, but the cool, clean justice of the truth finally brought to light. The house was quiet. It was his, and the morning was full of promise. What would you have done? Would you have offered the same grace? Or would you have demanded a different kind of justice? It's a question worth thinking about. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of hidden strengths and quiet vindication. The world is full of them, if you only know where to look.